Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show, Ancient Secrets Revealed. I'm your host, Michael Mamas. We're coming to you from a beautiful day at Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Like saying, I'm going to do this podcast and then I'm going to go out and mow the lawn and do some yard work. So I'm looking forward to the first day of that kind of beautiful weather. The grass is growing fast and all the flowers are in bloom. Okay, so this podcast was actually inspired because there's a group of kids, Bible study or something, their religious study course, I don't know. And they're going to be coming to Mount Soma, I think, next week. And I'm going to give them a little talk. And so just thinking about what I might say, and I don't even know if I'll say all this, but it kind of inspired this sort of a big picture perspective, not even just on spirituality, not even just on religion, but and how it all comes together, and physics, is a component of it. And so what would I say, And it's something that I think, especially with this expanded perspective, Oblivion to Immortality, I think it's something that's good for everybody to reflect upon, me included, for sure. So how it all works in a nutshell. Modern physics now is even saying that there's one thing out of which everything emerges. That one thing is called the unified field. It's the source of everything. When the universe manifested out of pure consciousness, which is the unified field, even modern physicists now, a number of them are recognizing that, it manifested into relative existence, and everything within that manifest existence is what? It's the unified field. That's the only thing that is. That's where it all came from. And it came from the unified field exploring its own nature. Consciousness becoming conscious of the only thing that really exists, itself. Birthing duality, and then consciousness becomes that, 3, 4, 5, it cascades out into a complex, infinite geometric structure. It's all mathematical, really. And so that underlying structure is the structure of everything. It's the structure of existence. And so anything in creation, you see, the way it happens then is that structure, when consciousness looks at itself, it's all self-interacting dynamic of perfection, of oneness. But once manifest creation, that's called relativity. Once relativity is created, what's that mean? That means that when consciousness viewed that structure, it sort of lost the sense of wholeness and got lost into the complexity that gets birthed out of that structure. It's called Maya, illusion. So the virtual image, the illusion, like a projection on a television screen. It's not the television screen, it's an illusion projected onto the television screen. But that becomes the reality. And so like that, things in creation start functioning more in terms of the projection. That's what becomes their reality. But the underlying essence of everything is that one thing. That's what it truly is. And so there's a natural tendency for things then to gravitate back. It's just like gravity. Things are birthed out of the earth, and then the seeds are born and they gravitate back, and more trees are born. So there's a natural tendency to gravitate back. from separation, from the illusion of duality to oneness. And as we go through the evolutionary process, just as existence goes on, what happens is different species, now we're kind of into a Darwin perspective, different species get created. It starts with very simple systems that embody more and more fully that intelligence inherent in that complexity within the absolute. And as it evolves, then we start going through the evolution of species, living beings. And it culminates in a process where species is born when it's fully awake to its own inner grandeur. That is the nature of the absolute itself. Fully awake to that. Now, sometimes people say, well, are there more evolved species out there in the universe than human beings? Well, it's an interesting question. And really, when the evolutionary process culminates in a human being, what do you have? You have a species that has a physiology that's capable of embodying the total intelligence, perfection, wisdom, harmony, coherence inherent in its own true nature, which is the absolute. So the thing is that, okay, we have somebody with a human physiology, but there's still some refinement that can take place. Because now the awareness is fully awake to that absolute value that is its own true nature. But that value needs to permeate all levels of a person's being, not just the depth. Now, just a word of caution here. Oftentimes when people get onto the concept that, oh, we're all a unified field, we're all God, we're all one with God, particularly, I don't mean any disrespect, but just the truth is, particularly a lot of times Westerners, when they first get on to Vedic knowledge, oh yeah, that's right, I am that. Oh, I can feel that inside of me, and yeah, for sure, I must be enlightened, you know. But the point is, everything and everybody senses that to some degree. They may not even say it in the sense of oneness, but there's something divine, some field of perfection, some aspect of divinity that they feel within themselves that they feel is so precious and so exquisite and so unbounded. But the thing is the clarity of understanding. That's still limited. And there we're still getting caught up into models that we create within the field of relativity. And one model can be a model of Vedic knowledge, but that falls far short of actually embodying it totally within the physiology as it wells up through all different levels of the being. So it's a huge step. The first huge step is when the physiology, it kind of like in a moment, it happens all of a sudden, it crystallizes, if you will, into a full wakefulness from that deeper value, that transcendental structure. We all sense it. But at some point in the evolutionary process, it crystallizes. It's like it just clicks in. All of a sudden, everything is completely the same, but totally different. And that's called enlightenment. And depending upon a person's angle of approach, it can be overwhelming, which it generally is to some degree. I think it took, who was it? Was it Ramana Maharshi? It took him a couple of years to even get used to it. And in a way, you never get used to it. You just keep evolving. But just so you can just function, you know. But then what happens is it starts to permeate more and more fully the different levels of our being, our behavior, our psychology, our understandings, our worldviews. It's a whole huge thing out there. And as incredible as enlightenment is, as overwhelming as it is when it happens, the hard part, if you want to put it that way, is this full integration. See, when a person becomes enlightened, it's not like all of a sudden they're fully integrated and with the totality and functioning like some Hollywood version of a divine being. It's not how it works. You still have your personality, your behavioral patterns, all of that, your beliefs, your convictions, but then all of a sudden this other thing gets added, which is your own true nature. But you still have the habits of relative functioning. And so there's a part of the Vedic literature called the Upangas, in which is contained the Shastras. And what those are is they're thought, often viewed, and they are, you can view them this way, as rules to live by, things to do. If you just do all of this, then you're evolving, or I don't know. And there is a degree to truth to that. And it just basically is sort of like the expanded version of the 10 Commandments, so to speak. But I think more accurately, it's a description of behavior of a person that has taken that next level, the hard part, accomplished the hard part, where the very functioning on all levels of their being is fully integrated with that transcendental depth that they awoken to when they became enlightened. But again, getting enlightened is the easy part. The hard part is refinement of all those different levels of being. Now, usually, and even if we were to read the Shastras, read the Upangas, the way we receive that information is based on our level of consciousness. Knowledge is structured in consciousness. So when we read those things, we misread them. Nevertheless, they point in a direction. They certainly help. Maharishi Patanjali went deeply into it all. But the actual process now, once that refinement of all levels of a person's being is attained, that's what they mean by immortality. That's the state of immortality. In the blog at michaelmamas.net, you can see the Vedic terms for these different levels if you'd like to look at that. There are different levels of enlightenment too. I've talked in depth about, for example, Brahman consciousness, but even Brahman consciousness is not immortality. Absolutely not. Far short, actually. As grand, as incredible as Brahman consciousness is, there's more. And that state of immortality, it's really unfathomable. Even enlightenment is unfathomable until it's attained. And once it's attained, you look at it a completely different way. And it's like, oh, I thought I understood it all, and I thought I had it figured out, and I've read all these books about it and know all about it. That's just the I get it syndrome, I call it. Once it's attained, then everything is completely different. And you realize that all of your understanding pointed in a direction that helped, it got you, inspired you to meditate or whatever, but it just wasn't it. And the same when we talk about immortality. I mean, come on, we're talking about something that's so far beyond the horizon, you know. Does immortality mean you just have a physical body that lives forever? Well, that's a matter of choice at that point. Immortality can mean taking on a quality of nature, a law of nature, and becoming the embodiment of that facet, that one facet of the diamond of what it is you are. They say that different gods, the posts, if you will, of those gods are taken on by different individuals at different times. And that's what they're talking about there. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Yeah.
There's a quote that I saw. It says, you cannot outperform your self-image. I thought that was a really interesting quote. Because in one sense, and it fits into this Bruce Lee quote that I've known before and liked, you know. Don't speak negatively about yourself even as a joke, because the body doesn't know the difference, you know. So this idea of maintaining a positive self-image, and it doesn't mean lying to yourself or anything, but it does mean, what does it mean? It means feeling into that place that is divine within you, and that you are an embodiment of, when no longer encrusted by distorted understandings, childhood wounds, whatever you want to say. And so it's like feeling into the depth of your being and functioning from there. Because in one sense, our self-image on a superficial level can be how we're caught up in our own self-judgments. And that's going to limit you. And so it's going to help, it's going to sort of prevent you from outperforming it. It becomes like a habit, something you've given yourself up to. But in another sense, your self-image is that place inside that we feel that's so divine and so exquisite. It's a field of perfection, and it's something you can never outperform. But this basic structure is the evolutionary process from the manifestation of existence and basically a rock with a rock nervous system. And then things evolve through the whole evolution of species, culminating in a human being, which has the type of nervous system that's capable of embodying the totality and functioning from that level, and evolving then through initial enlightenment to Brahman consciousness to immortality. So our journey, our path, is a path from oblivion to immortality. And there are all these astral echoes. Oh yeah, you pick up a book about the Veda and oh yeah, I get it. I'm divine, I'm one with God. And so then we get off on a astral echo of the notion of enlightenment, the notion of immortality, and decide that that's who we are, and it's just a bunch of mess. So you have to work through all of that. And that's basically, that's the big picture. That's the big picture. That's what life is about. Is that all clear, Scotty? Anything else to add?
I was wondering, you were talking about talking to the kids that are coming up.
Mm.
When you're saying consciousness becomes aware of itself, can you say God? So, in the beginning, there's God, and God becomes aware of himself, and then there's two things. Could that be said that way, or is it not?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
and that's it's not the reason why, but it's a component of why we're talking about this, really, Scotty, is because
Yeah.
you brought up the very question. What do you say to a bunch of kids that are studying religions,
Right.
and how do you convey that? You know.
Yeah. And another one that I had was, when, because, if consciousness becomes aware of itself, other, and then as it, you know, goes out into infinity, when and why is the imperfection allowed in that sequencing?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and the answer to that is it's the beauty of the complexity, the vastness of the complexity. It creates a structure that is so overwhelmingly profound and overwhelmingly beautiful that even the self can get enamored by it. That's what the relative is based on. It's based
Right.
on a lie. That's why, Brahma, the creator, they don't build shrines to him because he told a lie. That whole thing about finding the end of the linga. But
Right.
the point is, relative existence is based upon a lie. Based upon a lie that complexity, the beauty, what you find in the structure of that magnificence, uh, it overshadows the self to varying degrees. But even when we incarnate, even an earthworm, it has some sense of the divinity there. That's why it so instinctively protects itself, because it knows there's something exquisite there. But as the species then evolves, the understanding becomes more and more clear. The embodiment becomes more and more clear. The fullness of the experience of the true nature of the self becomes more and more clear. Is that responsive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then lastly, because everybody in that genre talks Jesus, and who was Jesus, what was he, that whole dynamic of Jesus. How do you address that with them?
Yeah. Jesus was the embodiment of the totality, the total value inherent in that one thing, the nature of God. So Jesus was birthed from that one thing. So what's the language for that? Jesus was the Son of God. That's the idea.
Right.
But even Jesus said, you'll do greater things than I've done, and different things like that. And the kingdom of heaven dwells within. You are one with God, all of that.
Right.
And so that's our path. Our path is to awaken to our own true nature. That's all. And most certainly Jesus and different uh, see, you could say that every religion is about the same thing as every other religion, really. It's about that one thing that's the source of everything. And in some arenas, it's called Jesus. In other arenas, it's called God, Krishna. In other religions, Buddha, what have you. But they're all emblematic of that same one thing. So if you want, it's perfectly fine to say all religions are all based upon, all about Jesus manifesting in different forms. Or you can say it's all about Krishna and Krishna manifesting in all different forms. But see, then we get into a thing about this knowledge is so subtle. And that's why the science, the physics of it is of value. Because when we understand the mechanic, then it doesn't push our buttons. If we say, well, what do you mean, all religions are based upon Jesus? Or what do you mean all religions are based upon Krishna? just manifesting in different forms. Well, now we understand the mechanic, and the rest is just language. And the language, through the language and our identities with different languages and different words, we lose our clarity of our perspective. So that's why conceptually understanding it, then the words might not even change, but they take on a different meaning, a fuller meaning. You know, some people were like, I've heard that, oh, if UFOs, if we find out there are other beings out there, other UFOs, other species, that would be the end of Christianity. No, it wouldn't. That's all Christ. It's all the unified field welling up through different species, different beings, you know? And then the question comes up, speaking of UFOs, the question comes up, are there species out there more evolved than we are? Well, the human physiology has the capability of that level of, if you will, immortality, full embodiment of the totality of the laws of nature. So there's nothing better. There can be different species, be it UFOs or whatever, do have different nervous systems that can well be fully capable of awakening to that level. And they'll function differently on that level because they're different nervous systems. But it's not really appropriate to say one is more evolved than the other species-wise. It could be that the average individual human is more or less involved than the average individual of a different species, being from another planet or what have you. But when a species evolves to that culmination point where it's a nervous system that's capable of embodying the totality, that level we can call it enlightenment, Brahman consciousness, onto immortality, if you will. Then to compare species is more on that level, it's more about comparing the average person with a human nervous system versus the average person with a nervous system characteristic of a species from some other planet. But once they both attain that ultimate level that those nervous systems are capable of, it's just different flowers in the garden of perfection. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can it also be said too that, you know, these different, you know, modalities of explaining, you know, existence, and you've got, you know, Christianity that came out, they all evolved from the languages or the, you know, the various factors and evolution of those areas too.
Well, that's absolutely right. And it's also, it's just, you can have different slices through the same one pie.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of times these myths, we call it a myth of this religion or a myth of that religion. Certainly there are some things out there that are just myths and they're not really valid in a sense, in a realistic sense. But at the same time, different slices through the same pie of perfection, all sorts of different beings emerge and different stories of creation emerge and manifestation emerge. And it requires a certain understanding, because different religions say, oh, you know, Jerusalem is the center of the earth, or India is the center, or here's the center. How can there be all these different one thing that's the center of everything else? It's just math. It's called the Riemann sphere.
Yeah.
So that's so easy to get so confused, because the understanding of the thing is deep. And most people aren't, they're not interested in the depth, really. You know, give them a simple little cookbook and that's enough. And that can be okay. If that's what they want, as long as it's moving them forward and they're evolving, you know, so be it. That's great, you know. Okay, I mean, I could go on and on, but I think that's enough for today. Scotty, okay?
Yeah, no.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk again next week.